Resilient ownership, the practical philosophy of habits, grit, and empowered leadership. Chapter 4. Extreme ownership, total accountability as freedom. In the philosophy of resilient ownership, extreme ownership stands as the non-negotiable discipline that transforms potential into performance. It declares that the leader, and by extension every team member operating under this philosophy, bears complete responsibility for everything in their world. There are no excuses, no blame shifting, no external scapegoats. Every outcome, whether victory or setback, success or failure, belongs to the leader. This principle is not about self-flagellation or absorbing undue guilt. It is the ultimate source of freedom, clarity, and power. When fully embraced, extreme ownership liberates individuals and teams from the paralysis of victimhood, replaces anxiety with decisive action, and creates the psychological conditions where growth, habits, motivation, and excellence can flourish without distraction. The essence of extreme ownership is radical simplicity. If it happened on your watch, you own it. This applies upward and downward. A leader owns the performance of their team, the clarity of their communication, the quality of their planning, and the execution of their strategy. Subordinates are taught to own their piece while understanding that the senior leader ultimately owns the whole. There is no room for, "They didn't support me," "The market changed," or "It wasn't my fault." Such statements, while sometimes factually accurate in a narrow sense, are rejected because they surrender control. In resilient ownership, control is never surrendered over the one domain that always remains accessible: one's own response, standards, preparation, and follow-through. This total accountability directly counters the fixed mindset that undermines growth. Chapter 1. A fixed mindset interprets setbacks as proof of inherent limitation, triggering defensiveness and blame as protective mechanisms. Extreme ownership, grounded in the growth mindset, reframes every failure as diagnostic information about the leader's own decisions, assumptions, processes, or leadership. The question shifts from "Who is at fault?" to "What did I miss? What must I improve? How do I ensure this does not recur?" This reframing accelerates learning and prevents the repetition of errors. It turns accountability from a burden into a powerful learning accelerator, aligning perfectly with the belief that abilities expand through deliberate effort. Atomic habits, Chapter 2, provide the daily infrastructure that makes extreme ownership sustainable. Without reliable systems, ownership remains an abstract ideal, easily abandoned under pressure. Clear habit loops, morning reviews of yesterday's outcomes, pre-briefs that set explicit standards, after-action analyses that extract lessons, turn ownership into executable practice. The 1% daily improvements in preparation, communication, and follow-up compound into organizations where accountability is cultural rather than episodic. When habits make ownership routine, leaders stop reacting to crises and start preventing them through consistent discipline. The 2-minute rule and environment design ensure that even under stress, the default behavior is to own rather than deflect. Intrinsic drive, Chapter 3, gains strength through extreme ownership. Autonomy becomes meaningful only when paired with full responsibility for outcomes. Granting people choice without expecting ownership breeds entitlement and chaos. Conversely, when individuals are given autonomy and simultaneously held to extreme ownership, they rise to the occasion. They treat their work as truly theirs. Mastery deepens because owning results demands honest assessment of skill gaps and deliberate practice to close them. Purpose sharpens when people see that their contribution directly affects mission success, and that success or failure rests with them. The 3 pillars of intrinsic motivation therefore thrive under extreme ownership. Autonomy feels earned, mastery feels necessary, and purpose feels urgent. Grit, Chapter 5, is both cause and effect of extreme ownership. Perseverance requires the belief that one's efforts matter and can influence outcomes. Extreme ownership supplies that belief by placing full agency in the individual's hands. When everything is owned, setbacks cannot be dismissed as uncontrollable. They must be confronted and overcome. This fosters the passionate perseverance that defines grit. In turn, gritty leaders model ownership more consistently, creating cultures where resilience spreads. The long-game focus of grit prevents ownership from becoming short-term heroics or blame cycles after every failure. Instead, ownership becomes a steady, disciplined orientation that sustains effort across years. The relational pillars of resilient ownership: genuine influence, Chapter 6, radical candor, Chapter 9, and the coaching habit, Chapter 10, all depend on extreme ownership for authenticity and effectiveness. Influence earned through empathy requires the humility that comes from owning mistakes publicly. When a leader admits, "I failed to communicate clearly enough," rather than, "the team didn't listen," trust skyrockets. Radical candor becomes safe and constructive because it occurs within a culture where direct challenge is paired with personal care and mutual ownership of improvement. No one fears feedback as an attack on worth when everyone operates under the shared understanding that we own our development. Coaching questions land with power when the leader models ownership first. What part of this outcome do I own, and what can we collectively own going forward? This prevents coaching from becoming rescue or advice dumping and turns it into collaborative problem solving. Extreme ownership is the antidote to the 5 dysfunctions of a team, Chapter 8. Absence of trust dissolves when leaders demonstrate vulnerability by owning failures openly. Fear of conflict diminishes because ownership removes ego protection. Disagreement becomes about finding the best path forward rather than defending turf. Lack of commitment evaporates when everyone understands that outcomes belong to the group and that silence equals complicity. Avoidance of accountability is directly countered because ownership makes holding others responsible a natural extension of self-responsibility. Inattention to results is replaced by obsessive focus on measurable outcomes, since those outcomes reflect directly on the team's collective ownership. The sequential pyramid of team performance, therefore, stands firmly when extreme ownership permeates the culture. Disciplined greatness, Chapter 7, emerges only under extreme ownership. The hedgehog concept requires ruthless focus and the discipline to say no to opportunities outside the intersection of best at, economic engine, and passion. A leader who owns everything cannot afford distraction or dilution. Level 5 leadership, humble yet driven, is defined by ownership, crediting the team for successes while personally absorbing responsibility for shortfalls. Disciplined people, thought, and action all flow from the refusal to externalize problems. When ownership is total, mediocrity cannot hide behind excuses, and excellence becomes the only acceptable standard. In practice, implementing extreme ownership begins with language. Leaders replace victim language, "they let us down," with ownership language, "I failed to set clear expectations." This linguistic shift is powerful because language shapes thought and culture. Public ownership, debriefing failures by starting with, "Here is what I own," models the behavior and gives permission for others to do the same. Training programs, after-action reviews, and one-on-one conversations all reinforce the principle. Diagnose the outcome, identify the leader's role in it, extract the lesson, and adjust the system or behavior accordingly. Scaling extreme ownership across teams requires careful balance. Senior leaders must own the big picture while empowering subordinates to own their domains. This decentralized command structure, clear commander's intent combined with freedom of execution, prevents micromanagement while maintaining accountability. Regular alignment sessions ensure that ownership at every level supports the overall mission. When conflicts arise between layers, the default is to push ownership downward. What do you own here, and how will you solve it? Common objections must be addressed head-on. Some fear that extreme ownership will crush morale or create fear-based cultures. In reality, the opposite occurs when paired with the growth mindset and radical candor. People feel empowered rather than crushed because ownership restores agency. Others worry it ignores genuine external factors. Resilient ownership acknowledges reality. Markets shift, resources are limited, luck exists, but insists that the leader's response to those realities is fully ownable. Energy spent complaining about externals is energy wasted. Energy spent adapting is energy invested in resilience. The freedom that extreme ownership delivers is profound. When nothing is someone else's fault, the leader is no longer hostage to circumstances, other people's competence, or unpredictable events. Anxiety decreases because worry is replaced by action. Decision-making accelerates because there is no waiting for perfect conditions or external approval. Creativity expands because ownership encourages experimentation without fear of blame for honest attempts. Teams become faster, more adaptive, and more innovative precisely because accountability is embraced rather than feared. This principle also grounds positivity in reality. The authentic optimism of resilient ownership does not deny hardship or failure. It asserts that hardship and failure are ownable and therefore surmountable. Setbacks become temporary data points in a larger story of expansion and improvement. The leader who owns everything sleeps better at night, not because problems disappear, but because they know the response is entirely within their control. Extreme ownership is not the final destination of the philosophy. It is the pivotal discipline that integrates and activates every other chapter. It makes the growth mindset actionable by demanding honest self-assessment. It makes atomic habits meaningful by tying them to real outcomes. It channels intrinsic drive toward mission-critical results. It sustains grit by removing excuses for quitting. It enables genuine influence through humble leadership. It supports disciplined greatness by enforcing focus. It dissolves team dysfunctions through shared responsibility. It makes radical candor safe and the coaching habit effective. In the end, extreme ownership reveals a paradoxical truth at the core of resilient ownership. The more completely you own your world, the freer you become. Responsibility is not a weight that crushes. It is the lever that lifts. It is the discipline that turns potential chaos into ordered progress, individual effort into collective excellence, and fleeting motivation into enduring resilience. Leaders who internalize this principle stop managing circumstances and start shaping them. They move from reactive firefighting to proactive architecting of success. Teams operating under extreme ownership develop an almost unfair advantage. While others debate blame and wait for better conditions, they own the conditions they have and relentlessly improve them. This is the freedom that defines resilient ownership, not freedom from accountability, but freedom through it. The chapters that follow build directly upon this foundation. Grit becomes possible because ownership removes the escape hatches that weaken perseverance. Team cohesion strengthens because shared ownership creates unity. Radical candor and coaching flourish in an environment where feedback serves collective ownership rather than personal ego. Disciplined greatness is achieved when ownership enforces the hedgehog focus over years. Together, these interlocking principles create a complete philosophy, rigorous, practical, and profoundly liberating. Extreme ownership is where resilient ownership moves from belief to battle-tested practice. It is the daily decision to own everything, improve relentlessly, and lead without excuses. In a world full of complexity and uncertainty, this total accountability remains the one constant a leader can always control, and the one that ultimately determines the difference between merely surviving and truly winning.